This is the story of how a routine traffic stop became something neither Officer Sarah Chen nor Marcus Williams ever expected to experience. The blue and red lights cut through the humid Atlanta evening like neon knives, casting dancing shadows across the cracked asphalt of Peachtree Street. Officer Sarah Chen adjusted her radio with one hand while steering her patrol car behind the sleek black Tesla that had been weaving slightly between lanes. Not drunk driving, she noted mentally, just distracted, probably another tech executive on a phone call, thinking the rules didn't apply to them. The car's license plate read "IN-OF-HR" in bold letters that seemed to mock her assumptions before she'd even made contact. Sarah had been patrolling this district for 3 years, long enough to recognize the patterns. Expensive cars in this part of town usually meant one of two things: old money trying to prove something, or new money trying to forget where they came from. Either way, they rarely took kindly to being pulled over by a 5'4" Asian-American woman in uniform. She'd learned to approach every stop with professional distance, her hand resting casually near her radio, ready for whatever attitude might emerge from behind tinted windows. The Tesla pulled over smoothly, no dramatic swerving or attempts to flee, a good sign. Sarah parked behind it, noting how the car's brake lights reflected off the wet pavement like red tears. The evening rain had stopped, but the air still carried that electric smell of ozone and possibility. She stepped out of her patrol car, straightening her uniform jacket and checking that her body camera was recording. 3 years on the force had taught her that every interaction could become a story, told in courtrooms or viral videos, depending on how the next few minutes unfolded. If you've ever wondered what really happens when assumptions collide with reality, you might want to stay with this story. Sometimes the truth is more surprising than any fiction we could imagine. As Sarah approached the driver's side window, she caught her reflection in the Tesla's dark glass. 28 years old, hair pulled back in regulation style, expression carefully neutral. Her father had wanted her to be a doctor, her mother a lawyer. Neither had understood why she'd chosen to wear a badge instead of a stethoscope or carry handcuffs instead of a briefcase. "Do you want to help people?" her mother had said during their last argument about her career choice. "But who's going to help you when you need it?" The window rolled down with an almost silent whisper, revealing a man who didn't fit any of Sarah's mental categories. Marcus Williams looked to be in his early 30s, with kind eyes that seemed genuinely concerned rather than defensive. He wore a simple grey sweater, no flashy jewelry, no aggressive posture. His hands remained visible on the steering wheel without being asked, a detail that spoke of experience with traffic stops that had nothing to do with guilt. "Good evening, officer," Marcus said, his voice carrying a slight southern accent that seemed authentic rather than performed. "I know I was driving a bit erratically back there. My wife just called with some news about our daughter, and I guess I wasn't paying attention to my speed." Sarah found herself momentarily disarmed by his honesty. Most drivers she stopped launched immediately into elaborate explanations or barely concealed hostility. This man simply acknowledged what he'd done wrong and waited for her response. She pulled out her citation book, more from habit than necessity, and noticed how his eyes followed the movement without fear, only resignation. "License and registration, please," she said, falling back on procedure when personal reactions threatened to interfere with professional duty. Marcus reached slowly for his wallet, narrating his movements in a way that made Sarah's chest tighten with recognition. He'd been through this before, probably many times, and had learned the careful choreography that kept routine stops from becoming dangerous encounters. When he handed over his license, their fingers brushed briefly. Sarah felt an unexpected jolt of electricity, not from static, but from something far more complicated. She looked down at the license and felt her assumptions crumble like sandcastles at high tide. Marcus Williams, age 32, address in Buckhead, one of Atlanta's most exclusive neighborhoods. But it was the small details that caught her attention. The way he'd organized his wallet, with emergency contact cards visible behind his license, and a photo of a little girl with pigtails tucked behind his insurance information. "Mr. Williams," Sarah began, then stopped. Something about the name tugged at her memory, like a song she'd heard but couldn't quite place. She ran his license through her system, expecting the usual minor infractions that came with expensive cars and busy lives. Instead, her computer screen filled with information that made her blink twice to ensure she was reading correctly. Marcus Williams wasn't just another wealthy Atlanta resident. He was the Marcus Williams, founder of TechBridge Solutions, the company that had revolutionized how small businesses access technology resources. Sarah had read about him in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, seen him featured in Forbes' 30 Under 30 list 3 years running. But more than his business success, she remembered the article about his scholarship program for underprivileged kids interested in STEM careers. The same program that had helped her younger brother get into Georgia Tech. "Is everything all right, officer?" Marcus asked, noticing her extended silence. His voice carried genuine concern, not the impatience she usually encountered from drivers eager to continue their important lives. Sarah looked up from her computer screen to find him watching her with the same kind eyes she'd noticed initially. But now, she saw something else there too. Intelligence. Yes, but also a wariness that spoke of experiences she was only beginning to understand. "Your record is clean," she said, which was an understatement. Marcus Williams had never received so much as a parking ticket. His driving record was spotless. His background check revealed nothing but charitable contributions and community involvement. Sarah felt the citation book growing heavy in her hands, a tool that suddenly seemed inappropriate for this situation. "I was distracted," Marcus repeated, his honesty cutting through the evening air like a confession. "My daughter Emma, she's 7, and she just lost her first tooth. My wife called to tell me, and Emma wanted to talk about whether the tooth fairy would find her at Grandma's house." He smiled, and Sarah felt something shift in her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the humid Georgia air. Sarah found herself smiling back before she could stop herself. "That's a big deal at 7, she said, then immediately regretted the personal comment. "Professional distance," she reminded herself, but Marcus's smile widened, transforming his face from merely handsome to genuinely beautiful. "It is," he agreed. "She's been wiggling that tooth for weeks, driving us all crazy. My wife finally told her if she didn't stop playing with it, the tooth fairy would refuse to come." Marcus chuckled, and the sound made Sarah's stomach flutter in a way that was entirely unprofessional and completely undeniable. The conversation hung between them, suspended in the space where duty met desire. Sarah knew she should write the ticket, complete the stop, and return to her patrol route. Instead, she found herself studying Marcus's face in the glow of her flashlight, noting the laugh lines around his eyes and the way his expression remained open and genuine despite being pulled over by police. What would you do in a moment like this, when professional obligation conflicts with personal attraction? Sometimes the heart recognizes something the mind hasn't quite processed yet. "Mr. Williams," Sarah began, then stopped again. The words she wanted to say felt dangerous, inappropriate, potentially career-ending, but they also felt more honest than anything she'd said in months. "I should write you a citation for distracted driving." "I understand," Marcus replied, and she could tell he meant it. No argument, no attempt to talk his way out of consequences, just acceptance of responsibility, a quality that seemed increasingly rare in Sarah's line of work. "But I'm not going to," she continued, watching surprise flicker across his features. "You were honest about what happened. Your record is clean, and—" She paused, knowing she was about to cross a line that couldn't be uncrossed. "And if you weren't married, I'd probably ask for your number instead of giving you a ticket." The words hung in the air between them like a bridge neither of them had expected to find. Marcus's eyes widened, not with offense or discomfort, but with something that looked remarkably like mutual recognition. Sarah felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment and exhilaration in equal measure. She'd just violated every rule of professional conduct she'd ever learned, and somehow it felt like the most honest thing she'd done in years. "The officer," Marcus said softly, and Sarah realized she'd never told him her name. "That's very flattering, and under different circumstances." He held up his left hand, where a simple gold band caught the light from her flashlight. "But you're right. I am married, very happily married." Sarah nodded, feeling simultaneously relieved and disappointed. "I shouldn't have said that. It was completely inappropriate." "Maybe," Marcus agreed, "but it was also honest. And honesty seems to be in short supply these days." He looked at her with something that might have been regret or might have been appreciation. "Can I ask you something, officer?" "Chen," Sarah supplied. "Sarah Chen, Officer Chen. Can I ask why you became a police officer? You don't seem like someone who chose this job for the power or the authority." The question caught Sarah off guard. Most people who asked about her career choice did so with barely concealed judgment or pity. Marcus asked, as if he genuinely wanted to understand, as if her answer mattered to him beyond the context of their current situation. "And I wanted to help people," she said, then immediately felt foolish for such a simple answer. "I know that sounds naive, but I grew up in a neighborhood where the police were either absent when you needed them or present when you didn't want them. I thought maybe I could be different." Marcus nodded slowly, as if her answer confirmed something he'd already suspected. "That's not naive. That's necessary. The world needs more people who choose difficult jobs for the right reasons." They stood there for a moment, separated by the width of his car door but connected by something neither of them fully understood. Sarah knew she should end the interaction, return to her patrol car, and pretend this conversation had never happened. Instead, she found herself memorizing details. The way Marcus's voice carried warmth even in formal conversation, the genuine interest in his eyes when he asked about her motivations, the absence of any condescension despite their different positions in this moment. "I should let you get home to your daughter," Sarah said finally. "Oh, I'm sure she's waiting to show off her tooth gap." Marcus laughed, and again Sarah felt that flutter of attraction mixed with the bitter knowledge that timing was everything, and theirs was all wrong. "She is. Emma's probably driving my mother-in-law crazy with excitement. Thank you, Officer Chen, for understanding and for—" He gestured vaguely at the space between them, acknowledging what couldn't be acknowledged directly. "Drive safely, Mr. Williams, and congratulations on your daughter's milestone." Sarah stepped back from the car, watching as Marcus rolled up his window and pulled carefully back into traffic. She stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, watching his taillights disappear into the Atlanta night, wondering if she'd just experienced something significant or simply made a fool of herself with a stranger who'd been too polite to call her out. Back in her patrol car, Sarah sat in the darkness, her radio crackling with calls from other officers handling other situations. She should respond to one of them, return to the routine of her shift, file this encounter away as an anomaly. Instead, she found herself thinking about Marcus Williams's smile, his honesty about his distraction, the way he'd asked about her motivations without judgment. Her phone buzzed with a text from her partner, Jake Morrison, asking if she needed backup. Sarah typed back a quick, "All good, routine stop," and realized she was lying. Nothing about the last 20 minutes had been routine. She'd just met a man who challenged every assumption she'd made about wealthy drivers, about traffic stops, about the possibility of genuine connection in unexpected places. But Marcus Williams was married, happily married, he'd emphasized, with a daughter who'd just lost her first tooth and a wife who called to share important moments. Sarah respected that, admired it even. In a world where commitment seemed increasingly disposable, Marcus's obvious devotion to his family was attractive in its own right. Sarah started her patrol car and pulled back into traffic, trying to focus on the remainder of her shift. But Marcus Williams's face kept intruding on her thoughts, along with questions she couldn't answer. What if they'd met under different circumstances? What if he'd been single? What if she'd been brave enough to say more than she had? 3 blocks later, her radio crackled with a domestic disturbance call. Sarah responded automatically, grateful for the distraction of other people's problems. But even as she drove toward the address dispatch had provided, she couldn't shake the feeling that something important had just happened, something that would change how she thought about chance encounters and missed opportunities. The domestic call turned out to be a false alarm. Neighbors concerned about loud music that turned out to be a teenager's birthday party. Sarah spent 20 minutes mediating between worried adults and embarrassed parents, finding common ground and diffusing tension with the same skills that had served her well during her encounter with Marcus Williams. But throughout the interaction, she found herself thinking about his question regarding her motivations for becoming a police officer. She'd given him the simple answer, the one she gave everyone who asked, but the truth was more complicated. Sarah had become a police officer because she'd grown up watching her parents work 3 jobs between them to keep their family afloat, only to be treated like criminals whenever they encountered law enforcement. She'd seen how power could be wielded as a weapon against people who had no recourse, and she decided to try to be different. Most days, she succeeded. She treated people with respect, listened to their stories, looked for solutions rather than reasons to escalate situations. But she also knew that her good intentions couldn't fix a system that often seemed designed to create conflict rather than resolve it. Some days, the weight of that knowledge made her question whether she was making any real difference at all. Tonight felt different, though. Her conversation with Marcus Williams had reminded her why she'd chosen this job in the first place. He'd seen something in her that she sometimes forgot existed. The possibility of being a police officer who actually helped people, who treated everyone with dignity regardless of their circumstances. As Sarah completed her paperwork for the domestic call, she realized she was smiling. Not because of her attraction to Marcus Williams, though that had certainly been unexpected, but because of how he'd made her feel about herself and her work. In 10 minutes of conversation, he'd reminded her that her job could be about connection rather than control, about understanding rather than enforcement. Her radio crackled again, this time with a call about a suspicious person in Piedmont Park. Sarah responded, driving through the quiet Atlanta streets with renewed energy. She found herself hoping that whoever she encountered next would give her the opportunity to be the kind of officer Marcus Williams had seen in her, someone who chose to help rather than harm, to understand rather than judge. The suspicious person call turned out to be an elderly man with dementia who'd wandered away from his assisted living facility. Sarah spent an hour with him, listening to stories about his late wife while waiting for his caretakers to arrive. The man reminded her of her grandfather, who died when she was 15, and she found herself genuinely enjoying their conversation, despite the circumstances. "You're a good girl," the man told her as his caretakers arrived. "Your parents raised you right." Sarah smiled, thinking about how her parents would react to being complimented by someone they'd probably assume would disapprove of their daughter's career choice. "Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Take care of yourself." As she watched the caretakers gently guide Mr. Peterson toward their van, Sarah reflected on how the evening had unfolded. 2 encounters, both involving people who could have been difficult or demanding, both resolved through patience and genuine human connection. Maybe Marcus Williams had been right about her motivations. Maybe choosing this job for the right reasons did make a difference, even when the system itself seemed flawed. Her shift ended at midnight, but Sarah found herself driving slowly through the city rather than heading straight home. She wasn't ready to let go of the evening's unexpected revelations, wasn't ready to return to her empty apartment and the routine of her off-duty life. Instead, she drove through the neighborhoods she patrolled, seeing them differently than she had that morning. Atlanta at midnight was a different city than Atlanta at rush hour. The frantic energy of daytime commerce gave way to something more intimate. Late-night diners serving coffee to insomniacs, emergency room workers changing shifts, security guards beginning their rounds. Sarah had always loved this time of night, when the city's mask slipped and revealed something more authentic underneath. She found herself driving past the spot where she'd pulled over Marcus Williams, though she wasn't sure why. The intersection looked ordinary now, just another stretch of asphalt under streetlights, giving no indication that anything significant had happened there. But Sarah could still feel the echo of their conversation, the unexpected connection that had formed between 2 strangers in the space of a routine traffic stop. What struck her most wasn't her attraction to Marcus, though that had been undeniably real. What struck her was how he'd treated her, with respect, with genuine interest, with the assumption that she was intelligent and capable, rather than just an obstacle to his evening plans. So many of her interactions with the public involved people who saw her uniform before they saw her, who made assumptions about her intelligence or motivations based on her job rather than her actions. Marcus had been different. He'd asked about her reasons for becoming a police officer, as if her answer mattered, as if she were a person worth knowing rather than just a function to be endured. That recognition had been more intoxicating than any physical attraction, more meaningful than any compliment about her appearance. Sarah finally drove home, parking in front of the small house she rented in Virginia Highland. The neighborhood was quiet, most of her neighbors already asleep, preparing for whatever challenges tomorrow would bring. Sarah sat in her car for a moment, reluctant to end an evening that had reminded her why she'd chosen her profession and who she wanted to be within it. Inside her house, Sarah changed out of her uniform and made a cup of tea, settling onto her couch with a book she'd been trying to finish for weeks. But instead of reading, she found herself staring out her window at the Atlanta skyline, thinking about chance encounters and the stories people carried with them. Marcus Williams was somewhere out there, probably reading bedtime stories to his daughter or discussing the day's events with his wife. Sarah tried not to feel jealous of that domestic happiness, tried instead to appreciate the glimpse she'd been given into a life built on love and commitment. In a world that often seemed cynical and divided, Marcus and his family represented something hopeful, the possibility of building something lasting and meaningful with another person. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from her mother, asking about her shift and reminding her about Sunday dinner. Sarah typed back a response, but found herself thinking about how to explain the evening's events. How could she describe meeting someone who'd reminded her of her own worth, who'd seen her as more than just her job title, who'd treated her with a respect she sometimes forgot she deserved? She couldn't, Sarah realized. Some experiences were too personal, too complex to translate into casual conversation. Her encounter with Marcus Williams would remain her own, a reminder that connection could happen anywhere, with anyone, if both people were willing to see beyond surface assumptions. As Sarah finally opened her book, she found herself wondering about the ripple effects of brief encounters. Would Marcus remember their conversation tomorrow, or would it fade into the background of his busy life? Would he think about her question regarding his motivations, the way she'd thought about his? Would he wonder, as she was wondering, about the strange alchemy that could transform a routine interaction into something memorable? Probably not, Sarah decided, and that was okay. Not every meaningful moment needed to be mutual to have value. Sometimes it was enough to be reminded of your own capacity for connection, your own ability to see and be seen by another person, even briefly. Sarah read until her eyes grew heavy, then prepared for bed with the satisfied exhaustion that came from a shift well worked. Tomorrow would bring new calls, new encounters, new opportunities to be the kind of officer Marcus Williams had recognized in her. She fell asleep thinking about possibility rather than limitation, about connection rather than conflict, about the unexpected gifts that could emerge from the most routine moments of any given day. The next morning brought rain and a new shift, but Sarah found herself approaching her work with renewed energy. Her first call was a minor traffic accident, no injuries, just two frustrated drivers who needed someone to help them navigate insurance procedures and hurt feelings. Sarah listened to both sides, helped them exchange information, and sent them on their way with their dignity intact and their faith in public service slightly restored. Her second call was a noise complaint that turned out to be a family celebrating a grandmother's 90th birthday. Instead of writing citations, Sarah ended up admiring family photos and learning about the grandmother's immigration story. By the time she left, the neighbors who'd complained had been invited to join the celebration. Each interaction reminded Sarah of her conversation with Marcus Williams, of his question about her motivations and his recognition of her desire to help rather than harm. She found herself approaching each call with curiosity rather than suspicion, looking for ways to solve problems rather than create them. During her lunch break, Sarah sat in her patrol car outside a small cafe, watching people go about their daily lives. She wondered how many of them carried stories like Marcus Williams's, how many had built lives of meaning and connection despite the challenges the world presented. She wondered how many opportunities for genuine human interaction she'd missed because she'd been focused on procedure rather than people. Her radio crackled with another call, and Sarah responded with the eagerness of someone who'd remembered why she'd chosen her profession. Each encounter was a chance to be better, to do better, to live up to the person Marcus Williams had seen in her during their brief conversation. As the days passed, Sarah found that her encounter with Marcus Williams had changed something fundamental about how she approached her work. She was still professional, still followed procedure, still maintained appropriate boundaries, but she also looked for opportunities to connect, to understand, to help in ways that went beyond simply enforcing laws. Her supervisors noticed the change, commenting on her improved community relations and her ability to de-escalate potentially difficult situations. Her partner Jake asked what had gotten into her, noting that she seemed more confident, more purposeful in her interactions with the public. Sarah couldn't explain that a 10-minute conversation with a stranger had reminded her of who she wanted to be. She couldn't describe how Marcus Williams's respect and genuine interest had restored her faith in the possibility of meaningful connection across different backgrounds and circumstances. Instead, she simply said she'd been thinking about why she'd become a police officer in the first place, and that seemed to satisfy Jake's curiosity. Weeks passed, and Sarah's encounter with Marcus Williams began to feel like a dream. Something that might have happened to someone else, but the changes it had sparked in her approach to her work remained real and lasting. She found herself looking forward to each shift, curious about who she might meet and how she might help. Then, on a Thursday evening in late October, Sarah received a call that would bring her story full circle in a way she never could have anticipated. The call was for a community meeting at a local elementary school, where parents and residents were discussing neighborhood safety concerns. Sarah groaned internally, expecting the usual complaints about noise and parking, the familiar tensions between different groups of residents who saw each other as problems rather than neighbors. But when Sarah arrived at the school, she found something different, a genuine community discussion led by someone who seemed to understand how to bring people together rather than drive them apart. The meeting facilitator was asking thoughtful questions, listening to different perspectives, and helping people find common ground rather than focusing on their differences. Sarah recognized the voice before she saw the face. Marcus Williams stood at the front of the elementary school cafeteria, leading a discussion about how residents and police could work together to create a safer, more connected neighborhood. He wore the same kind of simple clothes she remembered from their traffic stop, and his manner was the same, respectful, genuine, focused on understanding rather than being understood. When Marcus noticed Sarah in the back of the room, his face lit up with recognition and something that looked like genuine pleasure. He didn't interrupt the discussion or call attention to her presence, but he nodded slightly in acknowledgement, and Sarah felt the same flutter of attraction she'd experienced during their first meeting. As the meeting progressed, Sarah found herself impressed by Marcus's ability to facilitate difficult conversations. He helped angry residents express their concerns without attacking each other, encouraged police officers to share their perspectives without becoming defensive, and gradually built consensus around practical solutions that addressed everyone's needs. When the formal meeting ended, people lingered to continue conversations in smaller groups. Sarah found herself approached by several residents who wanted to thank her for her service and share their own ideas about community safety. She was engaged in conversation with a group of parents when Marcus appeared at her elbow. "Officer Chen," he said, and Sarah felt her heart skip at the sound of her name in his voice. "I was hoping you'd be here tonight." "Mr. Williams," Sarah replied, trying to keep her voice professional despite the personal pleasure she felt at seeing him again. "That was impressive facilitation. You have a gift for bringing people together." Marcus smiled, and Sarah remembered why she'd found him so attractive during their first encounter. "I learned from watching my daughter navigate playground politics. 7-year-olds are surprisingly good at conflict resolution when adults don't interfere too much." Sarah laughed, remembering his story about Emma's lost tooth. "How is Emma? Did the tooth fairy find her at Grandma's house?" "She did," Marcus replied, his smile widening. "Left a note explaining that Grandma's houses are actually easier to find because they're full of love." Emma was very impressed by the tooth fairy's wisdom. They stood there for a moment, surrounded by the buzz of community conversation, but somehow separate from it. Sarah was acutely aware of Marcus's presence, of the way he seemed to create a pocket of calm in the busy room. She was also aware of the gold band on his finger, the reminder that whatever connection existed between them had clear boundaries. "Can I ask you something, Officer Chen?" Marcus said, and Sarah nodded. "That night when you pulled me over, you said something about wanting to help people. I've been thinking about that conversation, and I wondered if you'd be interested in helping with something I'm working on." Sarah felt her pulse quicken, though she wasn't sure whether it was from professional interest or personal attraction. "Diddy, what kind of help?" "I'm starting a program to bring police officers and community members together for regular conversations, not just when there's a problem. The idea is to build relationships before they're needed, to help people see each other as human beings rather than stereotypes." Marcus paused, studying Sarah's face. "Do you seem like exactly the kind of officer who could make something like that work?" The offer was professional, Sarah told herself. Marcus was asking for her expertise, not expressing personal interest, but she couldn't ignore the way he was looking at her, as if her answer mattered to him beyond the success of his program. "I'd be interested," Sarah said carefully. "But I'd need to know more about what you have in mind." "Of course. Would you be available to meet sometime next week? We could discuss the details, maybe over coffee." Marcus's invitation was casual, but Sarah caught something in his voice that suggested the meeting would be more than purely professional. Sarah knew she should be careful. Marcus was married, and she was attracted to him in ways that could complicate any working relationship. But she was also genuinely interested in his program, and she respected his commitment to building bridges between police and community members. "That would be fine," Sarah said. "No, but I think we should meet somewhere public, and maybe include other people who might be involved in the program." Marcus nodded, and Sarah thought she saw approval in his eyes. "You're right, of course. Professional boundaries are important, especially when the work matters as much as this does." They exchanged contact information, and Sarah felt a thrill at having Marcus's phone number, even for professional reasons. As the evening wound down and people began to leave, Sarah found herself reluctant to end the conversation. "Mr. Williams," she said as they walked toward the parking lot, "can I ask you something now?" "Of course. Why are you doing this?" "The community program. I mean, you're obviously successful in business. You could spend your free time doing anything. Why choose something this challenging?" Marcus stopped walking and turned to face her. In the parking lot lighting, his expression was serious, thoughtful. "Because I have a daughter who's going to grow up in this world, and I want it to be a better place for her. Because I've been successful, and success without service feels empty. And because—" he paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "Because I met a police officer who reminded me that there are people in every profession who choose to do the right thing, even when it's difficult." Sarah felt her cheeks warm, understanding that he was referring to their first encounter. "I'm not sure I did anything that night except my job. You treated me like a human being," Marcus said simply. "And you were honest about your attraction, which was flattering, but you were also respectful of my marriage and professional in your conduct. You could have written me a ticket just to assert authority, but instead you chose understanding. That's the kind of policing this community needs more of." They reached Sarah's patrol car, and she realized the evening was ending. She didn't want it to, but she also knew that prolonging their conversation would cross lines that shouldn't be crossed. "I'll call you next week about the meeting," Sarah said, opening her car door. "I look forward to it," Marcus replied. "And Officer Chen, thank you for coming tonight. Your presence made a difference." Sarah drove home, thinking about the evening's unexpected developments. Seeing Marcus again had confirmed her attraction to him, but it had also revealed something else. They shared values and goals that went beyond personal chemistry. His community program was exactly the kind of initiative she dreamed of being involved in, the kind of work that could actually improve relationships between police and the people they served. But Sarah also knew she needed to be careful. Her attraction to Marcus was real and strong, and his obvious respect for her made it even more dangerous. She would need to maintain professional boundaries, even if part of her wished those boundaries didn't exist. Over the next week, Sarah found herself thinking about Marcus's program and their upcoming meeting. She researched similar initiatives in other cities, developed ideas for how such a program might work in Atlanta, and tried to focus on the professional aspects of their collaboration rather than her personal feelings. When Marcus called to arrange their meeting, his voice was warm but businesslike. They agreed to meet at a coffee shop near the police station, and Marcus mentioned that he'd invited 2 other community leaders and suggested that Sarah bring a colleague if she wanted to. Sarah asked Jake to join her, partly for professional support and partly as a buffer against her own attraction to Marcus. Jake was curious about the program and eager to be involved, which helped Sarah frame the meeting in purely professional terms. The coffee shop meeting exceeded Sarah's expectations. Marcus had clearly thought carefully about how to structure a program that would benefit both police officers and community members. His ideas were practical and well-researched, and he'd already secured funding and administrative support. But what impressed Sarah most was how Marcus facilitated the discussion. He asked thoughtful questions, listened carefully to everyone's input, and gradually built consensus around a program structure that addressed everyone's concerns. Jake was particularly impressed, commenting afterward that Marcus had a rare gift for bringing out the best in people. As the meeting ended, Marcus asked Sarah if she'd be willing to co-lead the program with him. The offer was professional, but Sarah caught something in his eyes that suggested personal interest as well. "I'd be honored," Sarah said, meaning it. "But I want to be clear about something. I'm interested in this program because I believe in what you're trying to accomplish. My personal feelings about you can't be part of the equation." Marcus nodded, his expression serious. "I understand, and I respect that, but I also want to be honest with you. I find you attractive and impressive, and under different circumstances, I would definitely want to explore that. Since those circumstances don't exist, I'm grateful for the opportunity to work with you on something that matters to both of us." His honesty was both refreshing and dangerous. Sarah appreciated his directness, but she also knew that acknowledging their mutual attraction could make their working relationship more complicated. "Then we understand each other," Sarah said. "This program comes first, and we maintain appropriate boundaries." "Agreed," Marcus said, extending his hand for a professional handshake. When Sarah took his hand, she felt the same electric connection she'd experienced during their first meeting, but this time she was prepared for it. Over the next several months, Sarah and Marcus worked together to launch their community program. They organized monthly meetings between police officers and residents, facilitated discussions about community safety concerns, and gradually built relationships that transcended the usual tensions between law enforcement and the public. The program was successful beyond their initial hopes. Attendance grew steadily. Participants reported improved understanding of different perspectives, and several concrete safety improvements emerged from the discussions. Sarah found herself energized by the work and impressed by Marcus's leadership abilities, but she also found herself increasingly attracted to Marcus as she got to know him better. His intelligence, his commitment to his family, his genuine desire to make the world better for his daughter, all made him more appealing rather than less. Sarah struggled to maintain professional boundaries while working closely with someone she found so attractive. Marcus seemed to be struggling with similar feelings. Sarah caught him watching her during meetings with an expression that went beyond professional interest. Their conversations after meetings lingered longer than necessary, and Sarah noticed that Marcus found reasons to touch her arm or shoulder during their discussions. The tension came to a head during a particularly successful community meeting in March. The discussion had been productive, participants were engaged, and Sarah felt proud of what she and Marcus had built together. As they cleaned up after the meeting, Marcus complimented her facilitation skills. "You have a gift for this," he said, stacking chairs while Sarah gathered papers. "You make people feel heard and valued. It's exactly what this community needs." "We make a good team," Sarah replied, then immediately regretted the personal implication of her words. Marcus stopped stacking chairs and looked at her directly. "We do, in a lot of ways." The air between them felt charged with possibility and danger. Sarah knew she should change the subject, focus on cleaning up, maintain the professional distance they'd agreed to preserve. Instead, she found herself stepping closer to Marcus. "This is dangerous," she said softly. "I know," Marcus replied, but he didn't step away. They stood there for a moment, close enough to touch, both aware that they were approaching a line they'd promised not to cross. Sarah could smell Marcus's cologne, could see the conflict in his eyes that probably matched her own. "I should go," Sarah said, but she didn't move. "You should," Marcus agreed, but he didn't step back either. The moment stretched between them, full of possibility and prohibition. Sarah felt her resolve weakening, felt herself leaning toward Marcus despite every rational thought in her head. Then Marcus's phone buzzed with a text message, breaking the spell. He glanced at the screen and smiled, the expression transforming his face from conflicted to purely happy. "Emma lost another tooth," he said, showing Sarah the text from his wife. The message included a photo of a grinning 7-year-old with a gap-toothed smile that was identical to her father's. The reminder of Marcus's family was like cold water on Sarah's overheated emotions. She stepped back, grateful for the interruption and ashamed of how close she'd come to compromising everything they'd built together. "She's beautiful," Sarah said, meaning it. "You should get home to her." Marcus nodded, pocketing his phone. "Sarah, I want you to know that what just almost happened, it doesn't change how much I respect you or how committed I am to this program. But maybe we need to be more careful about situations like this." "Agreed," Sarah said, relieved that Marcus was addressing the elephant in the room directly. "Bon, we're both adults, and we both have responsibilities that matter more than our personal feelings." They finished cleaning up in comfortable silence, both understanding that they'd navigated a dangerous moment without destroying what they'd built together. As they walked to their cars, Marcus turned to Sarah one more time. "And for what it's worth," he said, "if circumstances were different, if I weren't married and you weren't my colleague, I would want to explore what's between us. But circumstances are what they are, and I'm grateful for what we do have." Sarah nodded, appreciating his honesty, even as it made her heart ache slightly. "Me too. What we've built here matters too much to risk it for something that can't happen." They said goodbye in the parking lot, and Sarah drove home thinking about choices and consequences, about the difference between what we want and what we should do. Her attraction to Marcus was real and strong, but so was her respect for his marriage and her commitment to their shared work. Over the following months, Sarah and Marcus continued to work together successfully, but they were more careful about maintaining appropriate boundaries. They avoided being alone together, kept their conversations focused on program business, and gradually built a working relationship that was professional and productive without being personally dangerous. The community program continued to thrive, expanding to include other neighborhoods and attracting attention from city officials who wanted to replicate the model elsewhere. Sarah found herself recognized as an expert in community policing, invited to speak at conferences, and consulted by other departments interested in similar programs. But the real reward was seeing the changes in her own community. Relationships between police and residents had improved dramatically. Crime rates had decreased, not because of increased enforcement, but because of increased cooperation. People who had once viewed each other with suspicion now worked together to solve problems and prevent conflicts. Sarah's own career benefited as well. Her supervisors recognized her contributions to community relations, and she was promoted to sergeant with a recommendation for specialized training in community policing. The promotion came with increased responsibilities and the opportunity to expand the program to other parts of the city. On the evening of her promotion ceremony, Sarah was surprised to see Marcus in the audience. He'd come to support her achievement, bringing his wife and daughter to witness her recognition. Sarah was introduced to Marcus's family for the first time, and she was struck by how happy they seemed together. Emma Williams was indeed beautiful, with her father's kind eyes and her mother's graceful manner. Marcus's wife, Angela, was warm and intelligent, clearly proud of her husband's community work, and genuinely interested in Sarah's contributions to the program. "Marcus talks about you all the time," Angela told Sarah during the reception after the ceremony. "He says you're the best partner he's ever had for this kind of work." Sarah felt a pang at the word partner, but she also felt genuine appreciation for Angela's kindness. "Your husband is an exceptional leader. This program wouldn't exist without his vision and commitment. It wouldn't succeed without your expertise," Angela replied. "Marcus may have the ideas, but you know how to make them work in the real world." As the evening progressed, Sarah watched Marcus with his family and felt a complex mixture of emotions. She was happy for him, genuinely glad that he had built such a loving and supportive family, but she also felt a sense of loss for what might have been under different circumstances. When it came time to say goodbye, Marcus approached Sarah with his characteristic directness. "Congratulations on your promotion. You've earned it, and the department is lucky to have you in a leadership position." "Thank you," Sarah replied, "and thank you for coming tonight. It means a lot to have your support." Marcus nodded, then seemed to hesitate before speaking again. Sarah, I want you to know that working with you on this program has been one of the most rewarding experiences of my professional life. You've helped me become a better leader and a better person." "The feeling is mutual," Sarah said, meaning it completely. They shook hands formally, but Sarah felt the familiar electric connection that had marked their relationship from the beginning. This time, though, the feeling was bittersweet rather than dangerous. They had built something meaningful together, something that would continue to benefit their community long after their personal feelings had faded into memory. As Marcus rejoined his family and they prepared to leave, Emma ran back to Sarah with the impulsive energy of a 7-year-old. "Officer Sarah," she said, using the name Marcus had apparently taught her. "Daddy says you help make our neighborhood safe. Thank you for taking care of us." Sarah knelt down to Emma's level, touched by the child's earnest gratitude. "You're very welcome, Emma, and thank you for sharing your daddy with our program. He's helping make the whole city a better place." Emma beamed and ran back to her parents, who were waiting by the door. Marcus caught Sarah's eye one more time and nodded, a gesture that seemed to encompass gratitude, respect, and a gentle farewell to what might have been. After the Williams family left, Sarah mingled with her colleagues and supervisors, accepting congratulations and discussing her plans for expanding the community program. But part of her attention remained focused on the evening's emotional undercurrents, on the complex feelings that came with saying goodbye to a relationship that had been meaningful but necessarily limited. As the reception wound down, Sarah's partner Jake approached her with a knowing smile. "That was Marcus Williams, wasn't it? The guy from the community program?" "Yes," Sarah replied, wondering how much Jake had observed. "Nice family," Jake said neutrally. "He seems like a good guy." "He is," Sarah agreed. "One of the best people I've ever worked with." Jake nodded, and Sarah could tell he understood more than he was saying. "Sometimes the best partnerships are the ones that stay professional," he said quietly, "especially when there's mutual respect involved." Sarah looked at Jake with surprise, realizing that her partner had been more observant than she'd given him credit for. "You're right," she said. "Some things are more important than personal feelings. Doesn't make it easy, though," Jake replied with sympathy. Sarah appreciated Jake's understanding, and she realized that her experience with Marcus had taught her something important about herself and her capacity for making difficult choices. She had been attracted to Marcus, had felt a genuine connection with him, but she had chosen to prioritize their shared work and respect for his family over her personal desires. That choice had been difficult, but it had also been right. The community program they had built together was thriving, her career was advancing, and Marcus's family remained intact and happy. Sometimes doing the right thing meant accepting limitations and finding meaning within them, rather than fighting against them. As Sarah drove home from her promotion ceremony, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. A routine traffic stop had led to an unexpected connection, which had led to meaningful work, which had led to professional recognition and personal growth. None of it had unfolded the way she might have expected, but all of it had contributed to making her a better officer and a better person. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message as she parked in front of her house. The message was from Marcus, sent to her professional phone number. "Congratulations again on your promotion. The community is lucky to have you as a leader. Thank you for everything you've contributed to our shared work." Sarah typed back a brief response. "Thank you for the opportunity to be part of something meaningful. Wishing you and your family all the best." It was a professional exchange, appropriate and final, but Sarah knew that her brief relationship with Marcus Williams had changed her in ways that would last long beyond their direct collaboration. He had reminded her of her own worth, had shown her what it looked like to choose service over self-interest, and had demonstrated that meaningful connections could exist even within necessary limitations. As Sarah prepared for bed, she thought about the future and the opportunities her promotion would bring. She would continue to expand the community program, would train other officers in community policing techniques, and would work to build bridges between law enforcement and the people they served. But she would also carry with her the memory of a man who had seen her potential and helped her realize it, who had treated her with respect and honesty even in complicated circumstances, and who had shown her that doing the right thing was sometimes more important than getting what you wanted. If this story has reminded you of the power of choosing integrity over impulse, of building something meaningful even within limitations, then perhaps you'll want to share it with someone who needs that reminder today. Sometimes the most important connections are the ones that teach us who we can become, even when they can't give us everything we might want. And if you found value in Sarah's journey from a routine traffic stop to meaningful community leadership, consider subscribing to hear more stories about people who choose to make a difference, one difficult decision at a time.